Right. Hello, welcome to Story Hour. I'm Kathy Ramsperger, a lifelong journalist, humanitarian, and I'm author of two award-winning novels, The Shores of Our Souls and A Thousand Flying Things. I'm also a coach who founded Ground One and created Step Into Your Story. And everything I write and almost everything I do is about building bridges and connecting to others. And I love connecting people with authors that do the same. So welcome everybody. And today we have the award-winning author and who's written an amazing book about Japan, a mystery. Welcome, Rebecca Copeland, to Story Hour.
Thank you so much. It's such a delight to be here with you.
It's a delight to have you. So a little bit about Rebecca. She's a writer of fiction and literary criticism and a translator of Japanese literature. Her stories travel between Japan and the American South and touch on questions of identity, belonging, and self-discovery. And there's more. Her academic writings have focused almost exclusively on modern Japanese women writers, and her translation received the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission Prize for the translation of Japanese literature. That's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you.
Rebecca knows Japan, having lived there with her missionary parents during the country's recovery right after World War II. And she spent a year in college there too. And she knows what she's talking about in this novel. I'm sure she did her research, but a lot of what she knows about Japan is firsthand, and she has a PhD in Japanese literature from Columbia and is a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. A little about the book, and then we'll start with questions and answers. So this book is about someone named Ruth, who is also a translator. And Ruth returns to her childhood home in Kyoto, hoping for safety, solitude, and diversion from the wound she encountered in the United States. And so many expats do that. I know I did. But Ruth soon finds the storyline in the novel she's translating leaking into her everyday life, and her everyday life becomes anything but safe and solitary. Fictional characters turn out to be real. I love books like that where art turns to life and vice versa, and the past catches up with the present, threatening her and those she loves. The kimono tattoo takes readers on a journey into Kyoto's intricate world of kimono design. It also touches on dance, tea ceremony, and tattoos. And as Ruth struggles to unravel the cryptic message hidden in the kimono tattoo that the book is talking about, and this book is talking about, a story within a story, she's forced to confront a vicious killer along with her own painful past. I'm going to read one short review from Jan Bardsley, who's Professor Emeritus of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at UNC at Chapel Hill. And she says, whether major characters that follow you throughout the book or minor ones that pop up for a couple of pages all stand out as believable and unique. Totally agree. And I like the way Copeland makes you feel as if you're in everyday Kyoto, catching a train or taking a morning run or popping into a convenience store. You feel like you're there. At the same time, she weaves in stories that give you a deeper sense of Japanese culture, from kimono artistry and traditional dance to legends and literature. All this works to move the mystery in fascinating and unpredictable ways. A great read. Totally agree. I loved it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Rebecca, I don't usually start with the background of the author, but yours is fascinating because it it's as though you took everything in your life and put it into this book and fictionalized it. And so I'm assuming you lived in Kyoto, but I might be wrong. Tell us a little bit about your life before you wrote this book and how you came to write it.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. As you introduced, I was born in Japan. My parents were missionaries there, but in fact, I didn't have the luxury of growing up there as a child. They returned to the United States as soon as my mother could travel. So I was about 3 weeks at that point. And we settled in Wake Forest, North Carolina, very small, at that time, a very small little southern town. And I had no contact with Japan really at that point, other than stories my older sisters would tell or my parents would tell. An occasional Japanese friend would stop by and bring gifts from Japan. So it was a distant place until, as you noted, I was a junior in college. My parents actually returned to their position as missionaries and invited me to join them for 1 year, kind of a study abroad situation. And I have to admit, I didn't want to go. I was junior in college. I was having so much fun.
College, yeah. Even so, you get your friends and you only have 4 years with them and you don't want to leave them.
I know. I was sort of like, oh, what am I going to miss? But somehow I wised up and I spent the year with my parents in Japan and attended a Japanese university that had a small international program, and it just changed everything. It changed my life completely. It gave me direction. I was fascinated by everything I encountered in Japan and knew that I just wanted to continue learning more about this culture. So when I graduated college, I went on to university to continue studying Japanese. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up with a PhD and teaching Japanese literature at Washington University.
What a crucial milestone in your life.
I tell my students all the time, if you have an opportunity to study abroad, please take it. Don't be so comfortable in your college experience. It's so important to have those opportunities to step outside of your comfort zone, especially when you're young.
And it changes your perspective. Studying abroad and even living abroad, more so living abroad in some ways. But
I agree. I think it makes you learn more. It makes you learn more about yourself and your culture when you're exposed to another culture, right?
It really does. It really does. I totally agree. So thank you for that. You say your stories travel between Japan and the American South and touch on the questions of identity, belonging, and self-discovery. I love what you say because that's what I try to do myself. And can you talk to us a little bit about how you believe your novel does this? How did you bring it in?
Right. So I think from my own experience, and Kathy, you may have something similar, there's a sense of drift. I don't know. I never, because my parents were not from Wake Forest, we didn't have generations going back there. There was never a sense of belonging. And when I traveled, then I felt more comfortable, belonging on the road, kind of. And I think my character, Ruth, represents this sense of drift, right? She grew up in Japan. She speaks Japanese as practically her mother tongue, but she's 5'8" or 5'10". I don't remember now. She's tall and she has red hair. She's never going to be Japanese. And she knows that. Her heart feels like it belongs to Japanese culture more than it does to American, but she can never really be part of Japan. And so she's in this kind of in-between space. not exactly sure where she can touch down, where she actually belongs. And her parents were from North Carolina. So that's the Southern connection. And in her dreams, in her memories, she drifts back to those tender moments that she shared with her grandparents and her younger brother, who has disappeared. She has felt him in her dreams of going back to the mountains of North Carolina.
And is it okay if I say she doesn't believe he's gone, right?
There's something, there's something troubling because there was no closure. He disappeared while he was under her care, while she was just 12 and he was only 7-year-old boy. He disappeared, and she believes he was kidnapped. Nobody's really certain. There's no trace of him. Her parents are in an awkward situation because they feel they're guests in this country that they're trying to witness to, and so they don't want to be stirring things up. They just want to trust the police, but the case of her brother just gets tossed aside.
It haunts her, right?
Yeah, and so she feels guilty, and she feels that her parents blame her, certainly her mother. She feels they send her to a school, a study abroad school in Japan, where a boarding school, and she feels she's sort of being punished and sent away from them because of that. But they do that to protect her because they can't keep an eye on her. They have their work with the mission to consider.
Yeah, it's very realistic. And the whole time that I was thinking about her losing her brother,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about my friend who lived in Kyoto,
Oh,
who's my age, and she talked. This was haunting to me at 18. She would talked about the gloved people that would push you in, and that you'd be packed in. And so I would assume for children, it would be very easy for something like this to happen. And so my heart went out to her that she blamed herself.
mm-hmm.
And yet I knew there was no way she should blame herself.
Of course she shouldn't. I mean, she was just a child, and something beyond her power was at work. But yeah, she can't help it.
So let's talk a little bit about the inspiration and the inception of the book. I'd love to talk about why you decided to combine it with the history of the Japanese arts. There's one theme, and then make it it's a crime mystery, but it's got a bit of cozy in there too. Like it's a very warm book, even with all that happens, and a page turner. So you woke up, and what happened?
Oh, that's I wish I could have just woken up and then it was right there, but it was a long process, as you know, from writing. So my inspiration was, I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to write a mystery. I had read a series of mysteries by an author named Sujata Massey, who is an American who set her novels that were mystery novels in Japan. And right now she's writing about India, but she has about 12 novels that are set in Japan. Wow. And her main character is a Japanese American antique dealer, and who's like Ruth, part of the Japanese culture, but also on the outside, so she's sort of an outsider looking in. And in Sujata Massey's stories, we learn a lot about Japanese culture through the process of trying to uncover the mystery. And I thought, well, that's really a good idea. That's another way I can share my enjoyment of Japan beyond, writing academic books or doing translations. I can tell stories that then bring Japan to a broader readership, like Sujata Massey. So that was my sort of my inspiration. And being a novice, I wasn't exactly sure how to start. And I just kind of decided that the story would involve a translator. And I liked the idea of a translator who's translating something, and then whatever it is she translates, she discovers is actually happening. So she doesn't know if does she have evidence of the crime? Does she have the key to the crime? She's not sure how she's implicated in the crime. And as she's translating, things begin to get stirred up. And so that was that was sort of the grounds. That was the beginning of.
What a great beginning. What an absolutely great beginning. And are you familiar with all of the arts that you talk about in the book? You must be, because it's like you're there.
So I have lived in Kyoto, and I've lived longer in Tokyo, but because I went to Kyoto, I think I was just around turning 50. So I was very deeply aware of Japanese culture at that point. So whatever I saw in Kyoto made a deep impact on me. And I knew what I was seeing, rather than when I was in college and everything was new and I didn't understand any of it. This time I understood more. And while I was in Kyoto, I was teaching American students, but I studied Japanese dance. And I wore kimono for that. One has to wear kimono for dance. They're traditional dance. They are combined. And so I became very familiar with kimono and kind of developed almost a kimono fetish. I would just go out and buy secondhand kimonos and wear them to my dance class. And
they're so beautiful.
It was so much fun. So for some reason, the novel found its setting in Kyoto, and that meant I had to deal with kimono. So the kimono then enters the story that way.
Well, I think it's absolutely wonderful that it's there. I wonder if you would read for us for a few minutes,
Yes.
just so we could get a flavor of the book and your voice, which is a wonderful voice. It almost sounds Japanese to me. You can tell you're a translator. So my favorite aspect that you have already mentioned is that the art comes to life. I think those are really rare these days. And I'm wondering if the art, if you were kept writing on that way and had to cut, at what point, this is the writer in me, at what point did you decide, okay, now we need to switch away from the fiction and start really grounding ourselves in the reality of the situation? I thought you did that extremely well, and I wanted to mention it.
Well, thank you. The novel that we have now was very heavily edited because
well, they all are.
yeah, I suppose, and that's a good thing. The edits were just perfect. It helped focus and also speed up the narrative a little bit. But I went on and on and on about the technical detail of dyeing and weaving and wearing, and I would just get carried away because I just love it so much, and I really needed an editor to come in and say, well, that's really nice, but you're losing your story. And so I did have to rein a lot of that in, and some readers will be surprised that I reined it in, because there are some who feel it's still too too technical.
I think it was absolutely perfect, but then I'm a literary fiction writer, so perhaps people that just want fast-paced
That's
pace,
right.
they would have it does slow down in parts, and that's all good. I loved it because I believe that you read not only for enjoyment, but for education.
In your writing as well, your first book, people assumed was a romance, but you don't follow the formula. And that's the same thing for me. You know, it's a mystery, but I don't follow the formula. And that does throw some readers off.
It does, and yet I would do it again.
Me
And
too.
in the second novel, I followed the formula a little more and still made it my own. The ending isn't what you think it's going to be, people. But and thank you for that. I did it for readers that wanted it. But if I ever write a third book in that series, oh boy.
Well, I'm finding that I might be getting ahead of your questions a little bit. I'm trying to write the second, and I'm trying to be a little more cognizant of the formula. And it's not going as easily as the first one when I was just all over the place.
I totally hear you because you've always, well, I think all writers, most writers, writers, I'll call them, have that little gremlin on their shoulder that goes, no, you need to delete that. And then you've got the reader on the shoulder after you write your first book. I totally hear you. And you're not getting ahead in your questions at all. I see all over the place. So I would love if you read your passage, and let me show everybody your book because the sun is on it.
Oh, thank you.
It is a gorgeous cover.
I love the cover. Yeah. And that is Kyoto. That street scene is a famous scene in Kyoto. And
that is it. I love that it looks like a tunnel or an arch, and also that it is a person. And that's all I'll say. I say more.
Well, I'm going to read from chapter 7. And this is from page 104 to 105. And in this chapter, Ruth is going to meet her friend Maho. Maho is a Japanese woman who grew up in California and feels more comfortable in America than she does in Japan. So she and Ruth are kind of the reverse of each other. So Ruth is more comfortable in Japan. Maho is more comfortable in America. Maho has a mohawk that she dyes different colors, pink or green or orange, depending on her mood. And she's tattooed. So she's a very unusual young woman in Japan. And so Ruth is interested in learning more about tattoos because one of the characters in this book that she's translating has a full body tattoo that resembles a kimono. So Ruth doesn't know if this is fiction or if it's based on a real person. So she needs to interview a tattoo artist. So Maho is going to introduce her to the tattoo artist. Ruth is getting ready to go, and she will, in this scene, we just see her walking towards a temple that she and her brother used to play at when they were together when they were little. So we begin. What did one wear to meet a tattoo artist? Whatever the outfit, I'm sure it wasn't part of my sartorial repertoire. It was funny. I always knew just how to dress when wearing a kimono. The season, the occasion, the mood all helped to determine what was appropriate. But with my native dress, I was never certain. And what was my native dress anyway? Blue jeans and a t-shirt? That was almost always my default selection. and today was hardly any different, though I did decide to dress up a bit with a pair of black jeans, topped off with a long-sleeved purple blouse. I took a shortcut to the Kanage subway stop that skirted behind the mansions by the Nanzen Temple and ran alongside a small canal. The Nanzen Temple grounds were nearly empty as I cut across them. There was a man feeding pigeons by Sanmon Gate. People love Kyoto because of its rich history. Almost any point in the city will yield a story about an event that happened there in the 8th century and a later event in the 11th century, and so on. History wraps the city in layers. The waves of history undulate and overlap, allowing us to go backwards in time, even as we went forward. And my history was there too, my stories also settling into the sediment. Whenever I saw the great Sanmon at Nanzen Temple, I remembered the way my little brother and I used to play there on occasion. We would wrap our arms around the pillars of the gate and try to touch each other's hands. Our arms were too short, but each year we seemed to get closer and closer. The pillars were lighter in color near the base from all the hands that patted and rubbed the wood in passing. My brother's handprints were there, and mine too, pressed into the history of the temple, becoming part of the story. So that's the reading.
Thank you. I loved What Does One Wear? That was a wonderful. I think of that all the time for different occasions, and I'm thinking maybe something with sleeves.
Yeah.
But that temple, by the way, readers, is a central part of the book, and I love that image of them pressing their hands and their fingerprints into the columns, because I did that in Notre Dame, and I still can feel, especially since the fire, you can feel those history eons of people that have passed through it. And I really resonated with that image. And it brought me back to what a tattoo artist or someone who has a tattoo must feel. It's probably the same sort of feeling.
Right.
Yeah. So that brings me to my question. Beautiful job. Thank you so much for sharing. Have tattoos taken the place of kimono culture in Japan these days?
No, not at all. I mean, I think both of them, both kimono and tattoo, are not mainstream. Kimono is certainly accepted, but most people don't wear kimono. More in the summer, you'll see people wearing summer kimono, or known as yukata, which are very informal, light, comfortable, easy to wear. But generally, people don't go about their business in kimono anymore, unless they're in the traditional arts. And tattooing is gradually becoming more accepted in public, but there's still a lot of discomfort with people seeing people with tattoos. And many places you go to, public beaches or public swimming pools or public baths, will not allow you to enter if you have visible tattoos. So yeah.
Well, I need to tell my daughter that.
And there's such a dissonance, because most young people from other, particularly Western cultures, have tattoos now. And I think when Japan hosted the Olympics and the 2020 Olympics, that at that point they had to recognize that their anti-tattoo bias was on the way out.
It's so funny in a way, because there are so many Asian American young people who are into tattoo, and my daughter is one of them. She's Chinese American. And that's why I asked that question. It's quite interesting. And I remember I worked for National Geographic for a while, and I remember photographs of kimono and people walking down the street in kimono. And it makes me kind of sad that it's not, I realize it might not be as practical, but it's probably quite easy once you figure out how to wear one.
Exactly. And I think, the kimono industry kind of sabotaged itself probably back in the 50s or 60s by trying to make the kimono very high art and creating schools where women could go to learn how to wear kimono, and that made people feel very self-conscious about not wearing kimono appropriately, and then nobody wants to wear a kimono. And so I think when kimonos were the only garment, people didn't fixate on all of these sartorial rules. You just wore it, and it was comfortable.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And
Yeah.
probably unless it was silk, it was cool too.
Mhm.
So, it made sense, and they certainly are gorgeous. And I hope they come back a little. So I want to talk about the theme of love and how it plays in the narrative, because you do bring in the different types of love. And the reason I'm asking you is because I don't want to give anything away that you don't want me to.
Okay.
So there's obviously fraternal love, sibling love, and there's definite friendship love, and then there is a bit of a romance near the end. And so I'm wondering how you decided to bring in the romance at the end, because it even that romance is all about unconditional love, and I believe that's another theme in the novel.
Thank you. When Ruth enters the story, when the story begins, Ruth is feeling isolated from love. She's feeling she's feeling unloved and undeserving of love. She has just been divorced. She's caught her husband in an infidelity, and she's felt betrayed. She has a rocky relationship with her mother. She feels, as we talked about, this blame from her mother, and she begins to find her footing with her friendship with Maho and the people that she works with. And I think through the process of learning more about Maho and learning more about tattooing and the kimono industry and these things, she begins to develop more confidence in herself, which allows her to feel more receptive, I guess, to love. And so towards the end, there is a romantic encounter that completely takes her by surprise. And I think maybe takes some readers by surprise too, but it just sort of unfolds organically. And
That's how all good love
yeah,
unfold. It's why I liked it. It was very realistic, and I hope to hear more of it perhaps at some point. But I liked that it was brought in, because to me it represented hope for her future too. And I loved that the person is not who he seems to be. I loved that too. So I want to make sure we get to translation.
oh, good.
How did your translation work help you? I believe it helped you write this novel. I translated English a little. I'm nowhere near what you do, but for French and Spanish, and I edited those when the translator had done it to make sure that when it was translated back into English. So it's my belief that translation is more than word choice. And I believe that you definitely showed that in this novel. We're getting into perhaps a bit of an academic view of your novel, but it fascinates me. And translators fascinate me. How do you do your work, and how did you bring it into the novel?
So this is lots of questions, and it's so interesting. And I think translation, literary translation, makes you conscious of word choice. It makes you conscious of words, but also how words resonate. And just picking up a dictionary definition, even if it's correct, might not connote what you need to carry over when you're translating, right? So you have to get beyond the words. I think, as you said, it's more than just word choice. You have to get beyond the words and intuit the emotion of the text that you're translating, right? The sense. And of course, there's a long debate over sense, translating for sense or translating for meaning and all of that. But I'm much more of a intuitive translator. And so I think when you are writing, you are also doing something similar, because you're trying to capture something that hasn't yet been formed, right? It's still this sort of glimmer in your imagination. It hasn't yet been established with words. That's your job. And so in a way, a writer is also a translator, in that we are trying to capture that emotion or that sensibility in a language that is not where our minds are. I mean, our minds are not verbal, our sort of our imaginings are non-verbal.
You're seeing it.
Yes, you're seeing it, and then you have to put it in words.
Real on a piece of paper. You gave me chills.
I get very animated about
well,
topics.
I do too, because I think I would say that that's half of the job, is being able to translate the story you're experiencing into a story that everybody else understands. And that's what you do so well. And both in the book, and it shows that you're a translator to me.
Oh, thank you. And the story was narrated by Teresa Backen. And so I didn't realize this until I heard her narration, and it gave me chills, because she also is translating, she's translating the words on the page into a verbal texture. And when I heard her read, I thought, I didn't know it meant that. I didn't know that's what the scene meant. And so she had completely, given the scene her own translation, and I just loved it.
Well, we could talk about this all day, but I'll ask one follow-up and then I'll move on. I'm assuming, as a writer, because I seem to pick up on this, but I may be wrong, that at least the Japanese characters' names are symbolic. Can you talk a little bit about how you chose characters' names?
Probably the main character, Ruth, that was more difficult for me, because I wanted her parents were missionaries, so she needed to have a biblical name, but I wanted it to have a Japanese corollary. And so I played with lots of different names. There's Meg, I thought Meg, and then there's a Japanese name, Megumi, which means blessing. But I ended up with Ruth, and in Japanese, Rusu means absent or away from home. And so I thought, oh, that's it. That's the name, because she's never home. She hasn't yet found her home. So Ruth, once I got Ruth, then her brother Matthew, and again, it has to be a biblical name because the missionary parents. And then with the Japanese names, I really wanted something that might be easy for Americans to pronounce. And so I opted for shorter names rather than longer. So Maho, the man, Ruth's friend and colleague, Hiro. That's again a short name, Hiro. And then the other author, Date, the author that she's translating is Tani. So I tried to pick names with hard consonants that maybe American readers could read without stumbling, and that was really my goal. But then I had long names like Shibasaki or and too many names probably.
I think Americans are more familiar with the sounds of Japanese now because
That's true.
And the arts have always blended. I think about Monet's Japanese prints that he and I have one in my living room. But I don't know how they translate, but they seem to fit the characters, and that's my point. When I read Date, I thought Dante, and when I saw Hero, it's Hero, right? So
exactly, yeah.
they work really well.
Well, what's interesting is the main character's name is Ruth Bennett, and I did not intend this, but there's a famous American anthropologist who was very prominent in the post-war in introducing Japanese culture to Americans, and her name was Ruth Benedict. And it never occurred to me that Ruth Bennett sounded like Ruth Benedict until a reader pointed it out. Some of these
I
things
didn't
are so...
remember that either, but now that you mention it, I remember the name for sure. That's cool. Our unconscious does so many interesting
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
So there's a strong theme of healing in your novel, and can you talk about how healing is a symbol or a theme in a novel can advance a novel forward? In other words, I'll just say what I do it. It's a transformative arc. But I think so many expats will just fall in love with this novel. It needs to get out there more, because a lot of my second novel deals with this. A lot of people who live in other countries are a little bit running away, if not a lot. And if you write a novel about a runner, they're run until they finally hit a brick wall, and then they start to heal. So was that in your mind too?
It really wasn't, and that's really interesting. Once you pointed it out, there definitely is that. There's Ruth finds healing through like her friendship with Maho, but also through dance, and through sort of the love for kimono that she demonstrates, and her openness to absorbing Japanese culture and kind of being an interpreter of Japanese culture. Certainly she's our voice, right? She brings it to the reader, and it that's so much a part of her that she needs to understand, I think.
And it's almost like I wish she didn't have to have the whole experience. It was an ordeal, but I think the experience does change the way she sees absolutely everything. So even if you weren't aware, your subconscious was definitely a healing arc throughout the book.
Well, there's a rupture, right, in one's personality, and I think that this is one of the things that the novel is dealing with, is this sense of where do we root our cultural identity? I mean, what makes us who we are? And the story is one that unfolds, right, with different layers, and that's how we as people come to be, right, through the process of growing and layering and twisting and turning. And so Maho, Ruth's friend, is also in pain, and she cultivates pain through the process of tattooing. So for her healing comes through the pain of receiving a tattoo. And for Ruth, the pain and the healing is more subtle, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a lot on that, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut. They're mirrors. They're definitely they mirror each other. Beautiful job with that. So we talked a little about the romance at the ending. Did you said you revised, and so I'm wondering if the ending was always there or whether you changed it as you went along. And please don't talk about it if there are lots of spoilers to be had, because I think there are. But I thought it was a very interesting ending, and I think it had this is my interpretation. I think it did have to do with home, where her home was. And we can leave it at that, or you can extrapolate, depending on spoilers.
I think there were a lot of additions and subtractions, but the ending was pretty constant. And home, your point about home is well taken. At some point, Ruth is talking to her father on the phone, and he says, "Ruth, come home." He's in America. He says, "Ruth, come home." And she says, "My home is here. My home is with Matthew." Matthew, who is absent, right? Matthew, who no one knows where he is. She says, "My home is Matthew." And so the ending for many people feels cryptic, or it feels unsatisfactory in the sense that nothing is spelled out. We're not told precisely what happens, right? I think each reader is permitted to imagine how it ends for themselves. And for me, that's the most satisfactory way to end, rather than summing everything up. And I get this more from Japanese literature, from my long experience in Japanese literature. Japanese literature is often loosely structured. It doesn't have the kind of tight-knit structure that a novel has. It often just sort of unravels organically, and then it ends. Like, well, what happened? Well, it just ended. And isn't that just the way life is?
Exactly. You just said it. It's the way life is. I tell my students that it's taking a breath. As long as it's beat, 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 and if you come back down, you're gonna be back in the story.
Yeah.
So I loved that you let us figure out what was going to happen next. I have my own ideas.
Well, for me, I think it's really obvious, but I think, not everybody feels that way. So I respect that.
Well, I thought it was obvious too. But to be able to talk about it would give it away, and I don't do that. So Kathleen M. Rogers, welcome. She said she's a little late, but you are always welcome. And she says she's deep in revisions. Good. It's so exciting. So glad she's here with us, and everybody that's watching this on replay. If you have questions and comments, you can always put it underneath. I wish and ask for more of that. But we're really glad that Kathleen's here live with us. Is there anything that you think I left out? Please, anything you want to say to readers? Is there anything that you want the readers to know that we haven't talked about?
I want I want readers to want to go to Japan and to appreciate Japan as a place that has a wonderful culture, but also a place that's not that different. You know, because I've taught about Japan for so much, I want to get beyond the mystique of the mysterious Orient. So it's kind of ironic, I guess, that I wrote a mystery, turning Japan into a mystery. But I want my mystery to be an opportunity for readers to sort of step into this cultural space and feel comfortable exploring Kyoto.
That's what your novel does. It's what story does best. And your novel in particular, Kyoto is a character.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And the review that you received says that in a nutshell. You walk along the streets with Ruth. Your heart quickens when she's on the canal running by herself at night. It's really well done. And I felt like I got to know it a little better. And I also, not having been to Japan, I felt like I was transported to a place other than Tokyo. So often we hear about just Tokyo. And I was very glad it was about Kyoto. So what's next for you? What are you up to, Rebecca?
Thank you. Yeah. So I am trying to write another Ruth novel, not necessarily a sequel, but the second novel will also deal with Ruth and Maho and Hiro and some of the other cast of characters. People are wondering, will we get the answer that we have at the end? But that's not my objective. It's to continue to tell the story of Kyoto culture. This one will feature weaving more than dyeing of kimono, and also, of course, involve, sadly, murder and mystery and intrigue. And then I hope for Ruth to travel to other cities in Japan and uncover other mysteries.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. I'm excited. Well, thank you for being here with us. Will you tell us where we can find you and your books?
So I think, the best way is please find me on my website, which is www.rebecca-copeland.com. And there I have a blog that updates you on some of the things that were cut from the novel or other features of Japanese culture. And you can find my book reviews there or reviews of the kimono tattoo there. Brother Mockingbird is my publisher, and their webpage is also a great resource. And so I recommend Brother Mockingbird as well.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Brother Mockingbird, for publishing this wonderful book. I can't wait to hear more about Ruth in Japan. I always share teabag wisdom, and today's is the one who listens understands.
Oh,
and I knew you'd love that.
Yes, that's so important. Listening,
it's important in many professions, but definitely translation. So thank you everybody for listening. I know
thank you for listening.
Listen after, and thank you, Rebecca. Everybody, you can join me here every third Thursday at my Facebook page, interviewing authors just as wonderful and creative and brilliant as Rebecca. You can find all my interviews archived on my YouTube and my Facebook page. And you can find out more about Rebecca at Rebecca-Copeland.com, Copeland. Once you see it, you can sound it out, but I want to make sure they spell it right.
That's true.
And my work at Catherine Brown Ramsperger, Catherine with a Y, Ramsperger with a P, no B, and ground1coaching.com, the spelled out one, not the numeral. And please stay tuned for news about our autumn schedule. I have people lined up, but we're shifting around a little due to other people's schedules. And I'll have that schedule up probably in the next 2 weeks. And I'm wishing everybody a wonderful end of summer. Hopefully it's a little cooler if you are in the Northern Hemisphere. And I hope your summer has been full of books and will continue. Intrigue and good times. Read on, everybody. Thank you, Rebecca. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great to have you.